In this video tutorial, we're going to go over how to set up some keyboard shortcuts so you can be as efficient as possible when using the sorter or transcription window. So the first thing is, let's go to the Apple and System Preferences, and let's go to Keyboard. Make sure you're on this keyboard button or pane here. And if you're on a Mac that was made prior to 2016, it probably looks like this, where you can check this box, use F1, F2, etc. keys as standard function keys. By default, usually it's unchecked. So for example, at this point, if I hit F1, you can see on my particular keyboard it controls the brightness of this screen. But in our case, we want to check this box because those F1, F2 keys are going to have other functionality that we want to leverage in Studiocode. Now let's go over to Shortcuts, and we'll go to Mission Control, and typically by default, you might have to expand this right here. But these two check boxes, move left a space, move right a space, are checked on. So we'll go ahead and uncheck those. If you're familiar with spaces, you're probably familiar with how to switch to a different space via other keyboard shortcuts, so you probably won't miss these too much. But again, these are shortcuts that we can leverage in Studiocode. And if you don't know what spaces are, then you're not really going to miss anything by unchecking these boxes. Okay, so let's close the System Preferences. Now we're back in the sorter window, and all these shortcuts also, or settings also pertain to the transcription window if you happen to be using that for specific reasons as well. Okay, now that we have those settings established, the first thing I can show you is that's typically helpful is to use the Control and arrow keys to move around or navigate through the cells in the sorter. So you can see my cursor is in the last cell in the transcription column here. But if I hold Control and like up arrow, I can move up. I'm still holding Control, I can move left or right. And if you're transcribing or annotating video, ideally you're keeping your hands on the keyboard as much as possible and not having to go to the mouse. So that's sort of the purpose of using all of these shortcuts. So now let's talk about the F1, F2 keys. If your workflow involves checking this box and using the looping markers for any reason, then it's now that I can use F1. Oh, sorry, let me click down into a cell in the sorter so that the keystroke can be recognized. But now I can use F1 and F2 to advance and reverse the black looping markers there, instead of having those F1, F2 keys correspond to the brightness for the screen, in other words. Other keyboard shortcuts that are helpful to be aware of. Many people in the timeline use the space bar to play the video and pause the video. But you can see when I do that here, the space bar is reserved for typing or entering text, right? So alternative ways to play the video, which are actually fairly standard if you're not familiar with them in many video related software, for example, is Control L is play.
What's the problem?
Control K is pause, and then Control J is rewind. Hopefully that makes sense. I think if you're using the sorter or transcription window in its most efficient way, you probably wouldn't have to rewind that often because the looping markers should help you control the playback. So Control L is play, Control K is pause. Those, I would imagine, might get used frequently. So hopefully those keyboard shortcuts will help you use the sorter and transcription window more efficiently. Thanks for watching.